Huge Supreme Court decisions this week and another candidate for Maricopa County Sheriff. Welcome to the Mike Broomhead Show.
Well, I got a message, I got a song. Can I get a witness? Tell me what's going on. I show the people I've been away.
Dan Sabin is a Republican challenger to Joe Arpaio. That is one of the biggest races in Arizona. This is the third time Dan Sabin has run against the sheriff, so we'll talk to him on the show. Broomhead's best, and of course, hashtag this, but it's going to be a busy week, so let's get into it. We call it the sweep. On Thursday, two big Supreme Court decisions. First of all, affirmative action, a case out of the state of Texas. A girl qualified for college, going into college, Caucasian girl, more qualified than some of the non-Caucasian students, and she was not enlisted or enrolled in the Texas college. So all the way to the Supreme Court, and in a 4-3 decision, because there's only 8 justices right now, but Elena Kagan recusing herself because as Solicitor General, she had an opinion on this case, so she didn't vote. In a 4-3 decision, the Supreme Court said in narrow cases, colleges can use race when deciding enrollment. That way it makes a more diverse campus. So that was a 4-3 decision. It did not go the way of the challenger. So now we know, and I don't know if in the decision it was listed what that narrow scope is, but colleges can still use affirmative action to ensure diversity on college campuses. The other one that I thought had bigger implications was the President of the United States and his role in immigration reform. The President, by executive order, was giving amnesty to a lot of people by a stroke of a pen. It went all the way, and a federal court said he was expanding the powers of the office to a greater degree than allowable in the executive branch. It went to the Supreme Court. Now, again, only 8 justices. This time they all voted, deadlocked at 4-4. So the decision is it stays with the lower court, which means the president cannot expand immigration. It's got to go through the courts or through the Congress, become a law, and then go to his desk to be signed. I want you to see a little bit of what the president had to say on this because it was very interesting how he crafted his message. Watch.
But for more than 2 decades now, our immigration system, everybody acknowledges, has been broken. And the fact that the Supreme Court wasn't able to issue a decision today doesn't just set the system back even further. It takes us further from the country that we aspire to be.
Now, that's not the case. First of all, there is a decision. You can read it. It says a decision. And that decision is it goes back to the lower court, which means that the president expanded the powers of the office. Bigger issue than immigration. I agree with the president that the immigration system in America is broken. When I say that, first of all, we're not enforcing immigration laws as we should be. That's my opinion. But we can be using technology to track visas better so that people cannot overstay their visas. We can use technology to do that. We can use technology to expedite the background checks for good people that want to come here. We should be making it easier for good people to come into this country. I agree with all of that on immigration reform. But we have a huge border issue as well that's not being addressed. But the biggest issue in this case through the Supreme Court is the expansion of powers in the executive branch. The Founding Fathers were very clear, and they had to be very clear on the separation of powers. Each branch of government has its own structure of power. And if you go outside of the boundaries of that, you are going to do huge damage to our country as we know it. We've seen this in the Iranian regime. We saw this with Saddam Hussein. There are other bodies of the government, but do you really think they have a voice? If you expand the powers of the president's office, where that president can, with the stroke of a pen, change laws, you have relegated the Congress to either being a dissenting voice or a rubber stamp. And that's what was happening in this case. The Congress disagreed with what the president did. It went to the courts. The courts decided you cannot expand the power to that degree. And I will say to the people that agree with the president, what happens, and I want you to think about this, what happens if Donald Trump becomes president? If Donald Trump becomes president and stands up on Inauguration Day and said, I learned from President Obama, I too have a pen and a cell phone, and he begins by executive order to make changes to existing law, you are going to be happy that the Supreme Court did this because we still have a system in place where the Congress makes laws, the president signs them, and the Supreme Court makes sure they're within the confines of the Constitution. That's the separation of powers that was designed by the Founding Fathers, and that's the way that it should be. Another issue, the big this week, was the sit-in. The Senate rejected all of the gun control measures. The House didn't vote on any of them. So the Democrats in the House decided they were going to stomp their feet, throw a temper tantrum, and they were going to do a sit-in. I want you to watch just a little piece of what happened, and then I'm going to tell you what they're talking about. And the two don't seem to mesh to me. But watch this.
We have lost hundreds and thousands of innocent people to gun violence. And what has this body done? Mr. Speaker, nothing.
So what has this body done? So you know what they did? They did a sit-in. What did they accomplish? Nothing. What it was campaign rhetoric. What they want is anybody on the terror watch list to not be able to buy a gun. They say if you can't fly, you can't buy. Well, it sounds good because it rhymes, except flying on a plane is not a right protected in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. Buying a gun is. The Second Amendment. The President of the United States, in a great speech talking about the First Amendment, when Donald Trump said something about a watch list or for Muslims and a ban on Muslims, he said, we don't have a religious test, and he cited the First Amendment, and he was right. But the same emphasis on the First Amendment must be given to the Second Amendment. And when you have a Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, you can't compromise that. The terror watch list, if you listen to the attack on due process, that's what happened. Dianne Feinstein said you can petition the court to prove your innocence. That's not what America is. You don't prove your innocence in America. You're innocent till proven guilty. Joe Manchin, same thing. Due process is the problem. Another House member, due process is the problem. Due process is guaranteed and protected by the Constitution, and so are your Second Amendment rights. Now on to the Freddie Gray case. Cesar Goodson Jr. is the officer. The judge's name is Barry Williams. I want you to, before we talk about Barry Williams, let's just for a moment take a look at what the protesters had to say, and I'm going to tell you why it's ridiculous. Watch.
I'm outraged right now. It's disgusting. And then they want us, so it's going to be many more Freddie Grays, many more Tyrone West, many more Anthony Andersons. Thanks to this bullcrap judicial system. It sucks.
This officer was the officer that was charged with the most serious offenses, and just like the officer before him in a bench trial in front of Barry Williams, the judge, was found not guilty on all charges. Judge Barry Williams is an African-American judge that worked for the Justice Department in the Civil Rights Division. If there were going to be a judge that would convict, if it were prudent, it would be this judge. And this judge said not guilty on all charges. You've got to go with the judge's decision because there's no other way around it. And finally in the news, in Germany, a man with a gun goes into a theater and takes hostages. The police go in and they had to take him out. He was killed. Incidentally, I bring it up. Guess which country has the most restrictive gun laws in the entire world? Yep, Germany. Didn't stop a maniac with a gun, did it? Gun laws don't stop bad people, and it's not going to in America either. When we get back, Dan Sabin, two-part interview with Dan Sabin and his election or his running for the office of Maricopa County Sheriff. Stick around, we'll be right back. Biggest races in Arizona, some of the political races that are going to reshape how things are. Maricopa County, the biggest county in Arizona, and Joe Arpaio, one of the biggest names in law enforcement in the country. Challenging him again for the third time in the primaries. Dan Sabin, thanks for doing this.
Yes, no, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Here's my question for you. You've done this twice before, and politics is an ugly game sometimes. Why the third time, and is there a difference this time from the other two?
We know politics is a blood sport at times, and this is clearly a very important race. It always has been. I've dedicated the last 12 years trying to put out another option to the voters because it's that important to me. With my law enforcement background and career, I can see through the smoke and mirrors, and so how can I not? How can I not raise my hand and say, hey, voters, there's another option. We're not stuck in this situation.
Well, before we get into those things, let's talk about that option because you've got quite a career in law enforcement. You had 4 years with the sheriff's office.
Yes.
You were a deputy.
Yes.
And then, 25 years in Mesa.
Correct.
Chief of police in Buckeye.
Yes.
So you've done the rural policing. You've done the urban policing. You've been in management. You've been on the street. What is it now? How is law enforcement different now than it was when you started? And what then do you have to bring to the table differently than maybe you did in the past?
You know, I want to add to that resume as well. I got to spend a year down in Trinidad doing some international consulting at a law enforcement level. And in the last 4 years, I've been in the private sector, a very successful tenure in the private sector. So I'm actually probably more prepared now professionally from every angle to do this job more effectively. And you know, law enforcement's changed a lot during my career. We've gone from we're the police, go back inside, we'll take care of it, to we need your help, to where now there's starting to be a disconnect again. And that really concerns me. And we're seeing it here locally even.
How do you feel about that community, not community policing as much, but where the community is more of an oversight in some situations, where some cities actually have a board of people that kind of take a look at police actions? Do you like that community input when it comes to policing?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I've been blessed. I caught on to that need to collaborate in partnership during my career. And as the police chief in Buckeye, I won several of awards for having faith-based initiative partnerships, federal, state, and local law enforcement partnerships, business partnerships, partnerships with the schools, and I built my whole policing strategy around those 4 pillars. And that's my desire, is to take that county-wide, because it is very successful. We're all in this together. You need to have the stakeholders at the table to make effective law enforcement strategies and decisions and policing resources.
So as the sheriff would be the chief law enforcement officer in the county, how then do you, if you're in that job, do you work with not just federal agencies, because you know about the disconnect there, but other agencies in general? How do you make that all work together?
Well, correct. And you know, as a police chief, you're responsible for all that within the city. As the elected sheriff, you're the chief law enforcement officer for the county. You've got to be the point of the sword. You have to take the lead on those collaborations and partnerships and direction. You have to pull together all the available resources in this county to have an effective strategy, policing strategy that affects everybody effectively.
So and I want to get into the immigration part of this, because obviously with the sheriff's office and what's happened in the last few years and the disconnect with the federal government, but from the border point of view, we're so close to the border in Maricopa County, and terrorism in America and the threats against America. How does that play into being chief law enforcement officer in Maricopa County with intelligence and working with the federal government in keeping us safe from people that would do us harm?
Well, it's huge, because you have to be, as an elected sheriff, an active participant in the Police Chiefs Association, in the Sheriff's Association, with community tables, with community partners, and that's part of the whole strategy that we don't have. And I can tell you the success I've had in the past is being the one to take the lead on that and bring the people to the table. Because immigrations, and just in this Orlando tragedy, again, we don't know all the facts about all that case. There's so much speculation, but from the things that I've heard, that case appears to be a disconnect between the federal agencies and the local. Once they did their investigations, they kind of left, and nobody probably really told the local law enforcement. That's a huge loophole. There has to be a trust and relationship built. Hey, we're doing this investigation. We've closed the books, but he lives in your city. Here you go. You might want to take a look at this and keep an eye on him. Those are the kind of things that you got to take the lead on that we're not having.
When you look at Maricopa County and the diversity here in the economy, and from rural to urban areas of the county, what's the biggest challenge a new sheriff has to have, or that you would say is going to be your challenge if you walk in the door day one?
Well, in this scenario, you've got to rebuild the professionalism, the trust, and the respect. I believe that's completely disintegrated because we have a sheriff who tends to want to do it all on his own. And normally that is in a difference to what the local law enforcement's doing. And with those relationships I already have, I, in essence, grew up here professionally. I know all the police chiefs. I'm active in the Chiefs Association. I was president of the Chiefs Association. I know most of the federal agencies. So that would be a great opportunity on the front end, first day. Hey, let's get together. All of us that have worked together, grown up together, let's start and make a plan. So that would be an easy part of this job. Okay, so what we'll do is take a break, because I want to talk about the immigration issue, because that's such a big issue for the people of Maricopa County. But also the things that are going on in the sheriff's office that would stay or go. You gave me an interesting answer to that question on the radio show. I want to ask it again, because I thought it was a very interesting answer how you'd approach what stays and what goes. So in a moment, we're going to come back with Dan Saban, who is the Republican challenger in the primary to Joe Arpaio, and we'll find out if the third time is the charm in that race. We'll be right back. We are with Dan Sabin, candidate for sheriff in Maricopa County, and the immigration issue. I asked you this on the radio show, and you gave me a couple of really good answers on some of the things that are happening in the sheriff's office and whether those would stay and go, Tent City, the posse. But on immigration itself, there seems to be such a disconnect with the sheriff and the federal government and not the working together on a common problem.
What do you do on the immigration issue to make sure the people of Maricopa County are protected, the citizens are, but at the same time rebuild the relationship with the federal government?
No, it's awesome. It's one of the focus points of this campaign. And the thing for immigration, when you've had I've been in this immigration fight my whole 32-year career, so it's not new to me. And I'm a third-generation Arizonan, and we've dealt with it my whole life. Immigrations, unfortunately, we have a sheriff that puts it all in one box. And his focus is on what I call the low-hanging fruit. I look at immigrations as 4 categories. The person that comes here and gets under the fence because he wants to make a better life for himself, the persons that are here that commit other crimes after they sneak under the fence, the people that are here on expired visas, and the organized crime aspect of human smuggling, drug, coyotes, the guy driving the bus that has all the illegals in the back. This is the guy we want. That's going to minimize this threat. The 2 biggest pieces of that scenario is the organized crime aspect and the ones here committing additional crime. The resources have to be put on those first. They are the threat to us. The others are just low-hanging fruit that are out there. The sheriff focuses on that, and that's consequently now violated American citizens' rights. We've got this $50 million in settlement and lawsuits because that's what he chose. The Police Chiefs Association, when I was the president, we clearly told when they were writing SB 1070, great tool, but we have to be careful. We have to utilize it properly or we're going to racially profile. The sheriff went off and did his own thing. The police chief stayed over here and did it effectively. These high-level investigations aren't going to be on camera. They're not going to be on television. The effects take 3 to 4 months to get in, infiltrate these organized crime aspects, and take them out. That's the real success of minimizing the threat.
There are a lot of people, and I think I've even said it myself, that the federal government isn't doing a very good job with immigration. Therefore, they're leaving it to people in border states to do it themselves. How much of the blame do you put on the sheriff's office the way they're handling it? How much of the blame does go to the federal government for not enforcing the immigration laws?
Well, you have to put your ego aside. You have to bring the federal partners to the table. And in fact, when I ran in 2004 and in 2008, I supported the 287G program. That was my idea. Let's get the feds and have them in the jail. Once we have somebody on a local charge, you belong to me. Now, if there's a question of your citizenship, if we have the federal agent right there in the jail, we can go, here, bud, do your job. And not make it adversarial, make it partnering. Okay. Then push for legislation so when they let them out under the current administration after they committed a crime, how can we track them? That's a concern for me. And I've talked with legislators and people in the community, can we create some kind of tracking device or can we make them register so we know where they're at and we can keep an eye on them? Effective policing strategies focus on the 20% that are committing 80% of the crime. That's how you make it safe.
So there are a couple of things that Sheriff Arpaio has done that he is known for. Tent City would be one of them. The posse that he has grown. What of those programs are viable? Do they stay if there's a Sheriff Sabin, or are they eliminated under a Sheriff Sabin?
Well, you know, it's not fair to ask, because until you can get in there and see. But I will tell you, my record has been one of fiscal conservatism. We will evaluate every program that he has. He has done some good stuff. Applaud that, name a building after him, and let him walk away and retire and enjoy his life. But the programs that are not successful and not physically conservative, we have to get rid of. We have got to get this spending back to track, and that would be a huge focus.
So the spending part of it, a lot of them is, it's the lawsuits and the things that are spent there. But you're looking at some of these programs, let's say Tent City, where the sheriff touts how little money is spent on inmates because they've taken away so many things. Are there some of those programs you're saying are not fiscally viable?
Well, we've got documented proof that there's been over $200 million spent separately from the budget at taxpayer expense to settle the lawsuits. This current jail system, including Tent City, has a 50-to-1 lawsuit ratio compared to the other 4 largest jail systems combined. And we're talking about New York, Houston, Chicago, and LA. They have a daily population of 60,000 inmates. We have a daily population of 10,000 inmates. The lawsuits from these 3 in a 3-year period were 43 lawsuits. We had over 2,100 filed. So it's an irresponsible application of the process, and that has to be, everything has to be audited.
So if it's tough in 2 segments on the show to learn, because your career has been a really
Very
long
blessed.
career. So
Very
if
blessed.
people want to learn more about your campaign, is there a website, is there a schedule people can see if you're going to speak somewhere, they can actually walk up and ask you questions and learn more about you?
Correct. We've been very active in the social media on Facebook. We have Dan Sabin for Sheriff on Facebook. We have our Twitter. We've got our website, dansabinforsheriff.com. They can email questions. We can call our campaign office. We'll be available to speak. I actually resigned a very, very promising career in the private sector a couple months ago to campaign full time. I am totally available and dedicated to be out there to face this issue head on.
So it's Dan Saban for Sheriff.
All written out, correct.
And Saban is spelled just like the football coach.
S-A-B.
Just not quite the bank account, I imagine. You may not be running for this
Alabama
office.
ever plays the ASU, I'm going to go on the field and say, hey, that's my uncle. Maybe I can get on the field.
Yeah, right. You show him your ID and maybe get on there.
But yes, Dan Saban for F-O-R, sheriff.com.
Okay.
And then our Facebook is Dan Saban for Sheriff on Facebook, and then our Twitter. If you just put in Dan Saban, you'll find it.
Well, I appreciate the time. You've been very gracious, and I just think the people of Maricopa County should know what all of the options are.
Correct.
And so we appreciate the time today.
No, thanks for providing
Thanks.
the platform. You know, thanks for all you do, supporting first responders and the troops.
Well,
That means a lot to me.
Again, people dedicated to serving their community really deserve all the credit. You know, I have a brother that's in law enforcement and my brother who gave his life, so it's the two things closest to my heart.
I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
We'll be back. Something connected to Arizona, something that always makes us feel good. We call it Broomhead's Best. Tri-West Healthcare Alliance is something you may not have heard of. It's a company right here in Arizona. They were the company that implemented the choice card for veterans. When the VA scandal happened, the choice card was implemented by Tri-West Healthcare Alliance, and what it did was give veterans within certain parameters an opportunity to go outside of the VA to doctors outside of the VA. Well, they've just scheduled their 1 millionth appointment under the Veterans Choice Card. So congratulations to CEO Dave McIntyre and to everybody at Tri-West Healthcare Alliance and the veterans that are finally starting to get some of the care they need. It isn't a solution totally to the problem, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. And what a big landmark that is for veterans and for the Choice Card. So congratulations to Arizona's own Tri-West Healthcare Alliance and the Choice Card for veterans. Now, it's something that's burning up the internet, something that we want you to see and that everyone is talking about it. We call it #this. The 3-year-old girl practicing for a terrorist attack. We're calling it #lockdown drill. My parents, when they were young, they practiced for the bombs that would fall. We had the air raid sirens and kids getting under their school desks. Now, unfortunately, kids are preparing for mass shootings. If you haven't seen the picture of this little girl standing on the toilet so you couldn't see her feet in school, that was one of the things that they did. And this little girl practicing a lockdown drill at her preschool. It is really heart-wrenching, but it is the situation of where we are in America today. All right, in just a moment, we're going to close it out. But before we do, catch us on social media, on all the platforms, Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and of course at the website and on email. We'd love to interact and find out what your opinions are of the show. We'll be back to close it out here in just a minute. Don't go away. This week, another fire broke out. This time it's called the Cedar Fire up in northern Arizona. Over 40,000 acres burned as of Thursday. Only 22% containment. Almost 1,000 firefighters still fighting this blaze. When are we going to learn that it's time for the federal government to turn over the land to the states to take care of? Forestry is ridiculous because of the environmental rules that we have. Right near where this fire is the Apache land. The Apache Nation is a sovereign nation. They don't have to abide by our environmental rules. You go look at from the Rodeo Chetasky fire to this fire now. Those fires do not do the damage on the Apache land because they thin the forest. They have fire trails. When a fire breaks out, they can get equipment to the fire. Our rules don't allow for that. We could have a forestry industry in northern Arizona that is thriving, that changes the economy of most of the state. But instead of that, we're abiding by some archaic rules because they believe it's going to stop the animals from being run out of the forest. It's an absolutely ridiculous premise. It's silly is what it is. And instead, we're watching thousands and thousands of acres burn. It's a shame, and it's time that we ended this ridiculousness. We'll be back next week. Have a great week, everyone. God bless.
Get more of Mike Broomhead on Facebook, Twitter, and of course weekday mornings from 6 to 10 on News Talk 550 KFYI.